Welcome to Yeukai Business Show, UK's premier business show where we feature business thought leaders, high achievers, and industry experts. Today's episode is brought to you by World Outsourcing Solutions Limited, a company that specializes in helping executive business owners with virtual assistant services and business growth systems. Here's your host, Yeukai Ketchadori.
Hello, and welcome back to another very special episode. Today is special. Let me ask you a question. In your organization, have you ever caught yourself wishing there was a better way to resolve a conflict in a way that will create a win-win situation and create tremendous opportunity for both sides? If you ever found yourself in that place, and you didn't have any answer, you are in the right place, because my guest tonight is somebody who specializes in helping organizations like yours, Bill, and mine do this very, very well. Henry, thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Thank you so much, Yeukai. Thank you for inviting me.
Incredible. Just summarize to our listener, perhaps, who are coming across your work for the first time. What do you do in one sentence?
So I empower individuals and organizations to transform their conflict interactions into opportunities for growth, opportunities for connection, and opportunities for dialogue.
Amazing. Who wouldn't want that? It's confession time here. Today, in one of the organizations, I was, discharging my duties, my services there. I witnessed conflict. And it's so good that I get to talk to you about that, for my own education. And I know Bill in the audience and many other people listening are going to find your strategies very, very useful, because you have come up with 4 steps, really, that leads to conflict transformation. But before we talk about that, I know people are ready, perhaps, taking their notes out. Before we cover that, I know you've got an interesting history. You were born in Ukraine, then migrated to the United States, and then trained as a lawyer. And after that, you practiced law for several years, and then you went into conflict transformation. Give us perhaps an expanded version of my one-liner there.
Sure. Well, as you said, Yeukai, I came to the United States from Ukraine in 1994, and it was a very challenging experience. We came as immigrants. My family did not speak much English, and of course had to do, some jobs that typically in our cultures and our immigrants do, which is service and relatively low level maintenance jobs that my parents just had to do to support ourselves. And life was very, very challenging. And I felt that my parents didn't really have much of a voice.
Right.
So I wanted to be their voice. And for the first few years since I spoke a little bit better English than they were. But I thought that people like my parents, other immigrants, other minoritized people, needed a voice who could speak for them. And I thought that if I become a lawyer, I could be that voice.
Right.
So I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I was very successful at it. But more I did that, more I found our binary adversarial system.
Right.
To be creating, and when I say our system, of course, Britain and the US have very, very similar, court systems and a general dispute resolution system. It was binary. It served to often marginalize people. It was extremely expensive and extremely inefficient.
Right.
And so about 7 or 8 years into my legal career, while I was very successful, I began to feel like I could not imagine doing that for the rest of my life, for the rest of my professional life. And I was going through a series of other transformations and through a series of transformative events that began with a motorcycle. I actually ended up in India.
Yeah.
And I stayed in India for some time. I've actually been there now 15 times. I stayed, for different periods of time. And in India, I connected very, very deeply with some very, very powerful teachings on nonviolence and on communication and on peace. Teachings that were ancient, but teachings that I saw had very, very modern meaning and very, very modern application.
Right.
And so it was before I went to India that I started kind of looking around of what else could I do? How can I utilize my skills of working with people, but also doing it in a way that was more transformative and restorative, rather in a destructive way that I was doing it by going to court and being, in the English way, a barrister, and in the US way, a lawyer, a court-going, a trial attorney. So this is where I first got into mediation, and then I started learning other conflict resolution methodologies. I worked with the New York Peace Institute. I worked with a number of other agencies. And eventually, as I entered this work, I just loved it. I was passionate about it. And I was passionate about creating space and holding space for people in conflict. And as we discussed at the very beginning, teaching them how to transform their conflict interactions into something productive, into something restorative, and something transformative. Because most folks I talk to, when you say just the word conflict, and you say word conflict, and you say, well, what are some associations that come up for you? Generally, right, the associations would be stress, loss of productivity,
That's
right? Tension, all of these things come up. And that's part of it. But of course, conflict also is absolutely necessary for innovation, for change, right? Any sort of invention, any sort of social movement worth speaking about originated with conflict.
Absolutely.
Conflict is a very powerful natural force that we just have to learn how to harness, and then how to respond to it, and then ultimately even how to use it.
Absolutely, for our advantage. What I love about what you do is you've gone on to help not only individuals, but organization create a positive outcome from, a conflict. What could have turned out really bad. Would you share with our listeners today maybe one or two examples of where your methods, particularly the 4-part process that you talk about, has helped organizations?
Sure. So actually, Yeukai, in my full-time work, I work for a university, and I work at a university, for a large public university in Southeast United States, where I am kind of the internal conflict resolution coach consultant. And
Right.
so our university is quite large. We have 50,000, close to 50,000 students, 15,000 faculty and staff members. Very complex, many layers. So one of the things here that I saw, and this is in many ways endemic in academia, but I've also seen it quite a bit in businesses, is that people avoid conflict. People avoid conflict at all costs. Right?
That's right.
And sometimes they will call it, here in the US now, the fashionable word is civility or tolerance, whatever, the buzzword of choice it is that people call it and that people justify it. And what I see, Yeukai, is that this has immense cost. Conflict avoidance has immense cost. The cost of conflict avoidance is mediocrity. The cost of conflict avoidance is continued oppression, especially of groups, individuals, teams that are minoritized. The cost of conflict avoidance is that behaviors that decrease productivity, behaviors that cause tension, do not get called out for years, right? Until there is a major blow up, until there is a legal case. And then at that point, it's too late. And at that point, how much money, time, and energy are we spending, dealing with lawyers and dealing with court-based processes, rather than on working, on being creative, on developing our people, on developing our products, on developing our teams. So one of the most important things that I could share with you that I do is that I teach people how to stop avoiding conflict and actually how to engage in conflict. And, there are innumerable examples where when we start engaging in conversations, when we create space for people to listen, to understand, to also be very, very clear with each other about expectations, about boundaries, then we're able actually to create not only teams, not only functioning teams that are productive, we're able to create truly vibrant work communities that are diverse, that are engaged, that are inspired, and most importantly, creative and productive. Because now they're not afraid of conflict. They're not afraid of what may arise. They learn a way to deal with this. And they learn that actually communicating with each other in a compassionate way is about being very clear, very direct, making very, very specific requests. And then, of course, that creates accountability, that creates responsibility, and overall creates just happier people who, of course, are much more interested and much more inspired to do their best work.
Love that. Incredible. Let's dive deep, Henry, into talking about the full approach that you have, is included in one of your bestseller book. How do you go about, approaching maybe, an emerging conflict or a conflict that is already fully blown? Suppose we invite you in an organization, where do you start?
Sure. So the 4 steps, let me go through these 4 steps. And the 4 steps are first tuning inward. So, and that's the first step. That's the first principle of conflict transformation. So if we're talking about individual, this is where it is absolutely critical. And this is an absolutely critical tool of conflict transformation for an individual to have or to develop a personal practice, a personal reflection practice, a personal mindfulness practice. Now, a very Western approach to mindfulness is that we do it to feel better. We do it to have less stress, to be more productive, etc. My invitation is that we do it to get better at feeling.
Right.
So first thing that we want to do when we are in conflict is we want to tune in to where we are, where other people are. Now, if we are talking about organization on the organizational level, the first step, before we take any action, before we start doing anything, is for us to tune in as an organization and ask some very important questions. What is truly important to us? What is our value? Why are we here as an organization? Are there any kind of uniting principles that hold us together?
Right.
Because as the going gets tough, this is something that can help us, that can allow us to deal with whatever the challenge may be in accordance with our principles, in accordance with our values, in accordance with whatever is the most important kind of defining features of an organization. And I don't know if you see this in your work, Yeukai, but very often in my work, some of the trouble that I have is, you come to an organization and maybe they're doing some great work, maybe they're providing excellent service, producing a product. But sometimes if you ask them, so what makes this organization, they don't know. They don't know, right? This is kind of a question that stuns them. So when we are in conflict, this becomes, ideally, of course, we do this work before we get into conflict. Ideally, we do this work of sort of what defines us and who are we as an organization and what are our values before. But even if we get in conflict, this becomes an important first step. As an individual, tuning inward. so that we start connecting with our needs, so that we start connecting with whatever is important to us, so that we start connecting with other people and seeing where they are. And of course, as an organization, what is important for us.
Yeah.
Second principle, observation without evaluation. Observation without evaluation. So often, Yeukai, in our everyday interactions, if we just pay a little attention to our language, in Western cultures and Western societies, what we will notice is most of our language contains some sort of judgment, label,
Right.
evaluation, or conclusion, right? And that's kind of how we interact with each other. Except that if we're trying to give feedback to someone, yeah, and especially maybe feedback that, maybe is a little bit constructive, maybe is a little bit more difficult to give.
Right.
This is where it becomes absolutely critical for us to learn observation versus evaluation. Observation calls out behavior, but it calls in people. So often, right, maybe someone does something problematic, maybe someone is not being productive. We call out a person, and then we begin the process of progressive exclusion of someone, right? And that has immense cost, right? That has an immense cost. So let's say if it's an employee, someone who's worked for us for a long time, of course, we're losing talent and we have to bring someone else in, train, etc. So learning to communicate with others in terms of observation versus an evaluation. What is exactly a concern for us? What was so often I work with individuals, organizations, and they will say to me, well, this person is unprofessional. Well, this person is difficult. And I will say, okay, tell me what they did. What did they do that was concerning to you? What did they do that was unprofessional, right? And sometimes, people will react to that with giving me more sort of conclusions. And it takes a little bit of time to actually say, okay, what was the actions that they did that were troublesome? Something else that is part of observation versus evaluation, or observation without evaluation, is developing both a personal and organizational culture of active listening, where we actually listen to people, not to get something, not to wait to speak, not to persuade them, but we listen to them fully and unconditionally. And while that may seem like, that's something that perhaps is not as efficient, it is actually more efficient than doing the opposite. Because in my experience of working with hundreds of conflicts around the world, most people at the core, they want to be heard. They want to be heard. They want to know that they matter. They want to know that what they have to say is important, relevant, etc.
Right.
The next principle of conflict transformation.
Before you move on,
Yes.
Henry, before you move on, I just want to highlight, what you touched on there, that basically people wants to be heard. And this is absolutely the truth. If in any conversation, if you can show that you manage to understand where somebody's coming from, why they did what they did, just that one step, they will be also open to hearing what you have to say. And oftentimes, the whole thing becomes easier. Now you find a way of finding a solution that is a win-win situation. So I love what you said right there.
Thank you. So the next principle of conflict transformation is expansion. Right. So Yeukai, when we get into conflict situations, actually our focus becomes very, very narrow. We tend to focus on past grievances, or we tend to focus on future anxiety, right? We're afraid that someone is going to do something. And actually what we forget is that at all times, but especially when we are in conflict, we are looking at the world through a peephole of our own conditioning. So what we see is a tiny fraction of what is actually happening. So the key to expansion is for us to move from positions and from attacking those who hold the positions. And by the way, most of our exchanges, most of the things we see on television, most of the time that we disagree with someone, these are purely positional exchanges. I state a position, you state a position, and then we just escalate. Whoever states it louder, whoever maybe can come up with a worse name to call the other person, a more entertaining name, if you follow British politics, right? To call the other person, the more clever name, we say that person wins, right?
Right.
What we need to do is move away from positional statements, purely positional statements, expand to interests, expand to emotions, expand to values, and finally, and most importantly, expand to needs. Expand to needs. Just like in business, if we truly want to offer something that is relevant to our customers, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, we have to understand the needs of our customers. We have to understand what is it that they need. The same thing in conflict. If we can move from the shouting of positions or attacking of those who hold the positions to actual consideration of needs, the conflict is fundamentally transformed. And in my experience of working with many conflicts, most conflicts revolve around 7 key needs. The need for security,
Right.
the need for autonomy, the need for authenticity, the need for connection, the need for peace, the need for meaning, and the need for expansion. So when we as leaders are facing conflict, when we as leaders are involved in conflict, when we as leaders are trying to resolve conflict, the question that we need to be asking is, what is the unexpressed need underneath that?
Right.
In other words, another aspect of expansion is, what is it that we don't know? Which brings us to the final aspect, final and perhaps the most important aspect of conflict transformation, and that is exploration. Exploration. And, whenever we, again, in Western societies, when we talk about business, when we talk about organizations, when we talk about management, we tend to focus and emphasize what we know. And in fact, so many of us, we define ourselves in terms of our knowledge, right? This is the letters after my name. This is the books that I've written. This is the articles I've done. This is, what I know. But I think a much more important and powerful focus is to focus on what we don't know.
Right.
And if we begin with the idea that actually we don't know, or we know a lot less than we think we do, then natural curiosity arises. And curiosity is a very, very powerful force in conflict. Now, curiosity cannot coexist with fear. So we have to very intentionally make a shift to curiosity.
Right.
So exploration is about curiosity, bringing that curiosity into conflict. It is also about something else. It is moving away from binary.
Right.
We tend to see conflict in the Western world in a very binary way, right? We tend to see conflict as a competition of 2 narratives, one superior, one inferior. And then through our processes, whether it's debate in parliament, whether it's the court processes, the superior narrative will prevail. Actually, I think we need to see conflict in a much more nuanced way, and we need to go beyond the boundary. So when someone comes to me and says, hey, we have these 2 groups of people, and they're fighting, and this is just between 2 groups, this is an invitation to look beyond the binary.
Right.
And for us to lean into conflict and to engage with complexity, with nuance, with ambiguity that every seemingly binary situation brings, right? Otherwise, you end up in a situation that perhaps is very familiar to you and to your listeners. You end up with the Brexit situation, right?
Right.
Should you go or should you stay? That's the question. What does going mean? What does staying mean? No one knows. And so we have this seemingly binary choice, right? That is anything but. So exploration is about engaging with curiosity. It's about asking questions, asking the right questions in conflict, but also leaning into conflict. This is where we don't want to be afraid of conflict. We lean in and we engage with complexity, ambiguity, nuance, and uncertainty. And as we do that, that's where we're able to transform conflict interactions into something restorative, into something transformative, and ultimately into something productive.
Right. Amazing. Well, this is incredible. Bill, if you're listening, I hope you're taking as much notes as I am here, because this is incredible. Love how you're simplifying this. Coming back, Henry, to, for those perhaps who are right deep in the conflict, and it seems like they are losing it all. It seems like things are not working at all. If you were to step into that organization, where would you start, and how would you help the parties involved?
So I would start with deep listening,
Right.
Deep listening to all the involved parties. And that can just go a very long way towards even beginning to understand what is it that we need to do. So I would start with very, very deep listening to all the involved individuals. And in listening to all the involved individuals, what I am listening for are what are the narratives and what are the assumptions that people are making about all the other people involved. And that's inevitable, right? That's inevitable. People assume and tell us all kinds of stories about what is actually happening. So I want to listen. I want to take a note of all the stories that are actually happening, with the goal of eventually bringing, to the extent possible, all the parties together in some sort of transformative or restorative process. This could be something where we use some principles and techniques of restorative dialogue, perhaps some other techniques, some other tools. It's very critical in those situations for me to create space to take people outside of their minds. Why do I say that? Why do I want to do that? There's a saying from an Indian mystic, a brilliant being named Sadhguru, and he talks about the mind being a wonderful scalpel. It's wonderful for dissecting. It's excellent for cutting through, very necessary. It's terrible for sewing, and sometimes we need to sew. And sometimes what I am seeing the mistakes that managers, leaders make is they try to think themselves out of conflict, and that's not going to happen.
Right.
We're not going to think ourselves out of conflict. So I need to create a process where people can start building trust, where they can start connecting with each other, even on a simple human level. Sometimes it could be as simple as, sharing a meal, maybe having a few pins so people relax a little bit. Sometimes, there's some very intentional sharing where we allow for people to connect with their fundamental humanity. Because before we can do anything with conflict, before we can deal with any of the substantive issues,
right,
people on all sides of this have to see each other as equal, have to see each other as human. If I don't see you as a human, there's nothing I can do, right? Whatever conflict that we have, if I don't see you as a person, or you don't see me as a person, then it becomes very, very difficult to do it because we dehumanize each other to such an extent that if we do cruel, nasty things, it doesn't feel like we're doing it to another person, right? So it becomes very, very critical in these types of conflict situations. And this is where we spend a lot of time, establishing trust. Sometimes this is through very small steps that different people, different teams, different members of the organization can take to build that trust and kind of enforce that trust to build that common humanity.
Right.
And then we can start engaging in further dialogue where we will do a lot of exploration, and my focus when I come to organizations, I always ask myself this question: what is it that I don't know? What is it that I don't know?
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And then, from there, I will just ask people, so tell me, maybe sometimes I sound dumb, and that's totally okay with me. Tell me more. Tell me, I don't want to make any assumptions. Tell me more. Help me understand this, help me understand your thinking. Help me understand what were you trying to accomplish. And then slowly we start building from there. Something also that we start doing is we start at some point, we may get to brainstorming, and brainstorming some solutions. But here, something that's really critical is we separate idea generation from idea evaluation.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And try to work through that. Also, something, a word of caution to your listeners, to other leaders. So often, we want to get to the solution. We want to solve the problem, right?
That sounds like me.
Sometimes, when I teach workshops, I will ask by asking people, who is a good problem solver? And people raise their hand and I said, good, we'll fix that. Because, sometimes we're so quick to solve a problem, but actually the problem that we are solving is not the real problem.
That's right.
The problem that we're solving is not the real problem. And this is where it takes actually some courage. It takes some patience. It takes some self-awareness to say, you know what? This is what I see in front of me, but there's so many things that I don't see. So I don't know what the problem is. I don't want to assume that this is a problem, maybe. But before I do a quick fix that will seem like it's fixing it, but it's not, let me do a little bit of a deep dive. Let me learn more. I often use this examples with students and with others, two employees are arguing. They're arguing over the radio at work. And they're arguing, over one employee's use of the radio and the other employee's, the radio station that they're using. And when I work with managers, I will often say to them, okay, well, you're a manager. How would you deal with this? What would you do? And inevitably, someone will say, well, what about headphones? Right? Why can't you use headphones? And we generally have a discussion with them to say, do you actually know that this conflict is about the radio? Is it possible? Is it possible that 2 years ago, one of these employees ate the other employee's yogurt? And since then, right, they're just not getting along. So then, unless you're going to deal with the yogurt, you tell them to wear headphones. They're going to be back in your office half an hour later with yet another issue, yet another problem.
That's right. That's right. Wow, this is incredible. I would love to keep on going for sure, but I know that there will be people who wants to contact you toward the end to find out more. Where can people connect with you other than the podcast today?
Sure. So folks can connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, I have a webpage, and it's www.livingpeaceinstitute.com. Living Peace Institute, all one word. www.livingpeaceinstitute.com. And of course, there is a book out where I expand on a lot of these ideas. I know it's available in the UK, as it's available around the world.
It is indeed. And do you, other than LinkedIn, do you have other social media handles that you would love to share with our audience today?
Sure. I am on Facebook, just under my name, and I have both an author page and an individual page, and also on Instagram. And my Instagram call sign is at Living Peace Institute.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then I'm nominally on Twitter, but I really am not.
Well, we have provided people with a few options there. And again, those options will be right below this recording. So you can just click there and you'll be taken straight to Henry's website and also other social media platforms as well. As we come to the end of our time together, Henry, for those that wants to speed their conflict transformation knowledge, do you have training or coaching program that you've put together?
So a lot of this I describe in the book. I'm now in the process of developing actually a coaching certification process in the process that I co-developed, and it's also part of the book, called Dissolving Conflict from Within. And that's going to be available soon, and more information will be forthcoming on my website. And of course, I speak, I train, I teach all over the world. And I'm happy, of course, to connect with people in that way.
Amazing. Excellent. Love that. Thank you so much, Henry, for being here on the show. Truly have enjoyed that conversation and found some of the principles you shared here very, very useful. And we want to say thank you, and I want to wish you the very best in your journey in helping. And in fact, we would love to have you back on the show sometime and share with you some of the success stories and how we can perhaps work together for sure.
Absolutely, Yeukai. Thank you so much for having me, and you're doing some great work bringing amazing people together. It's a privilege to be speaking with you.
Thank you. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to know more about how you can perhaps benefit from conflict transformation, you know where to find. Just click the link below. Or if you want to connect with Henry in person or over social media, you can just go ahead and do just that. We love having you here, and we love you coming back to listen to more materials that we have. And I can't wait to send you some more stuff here on the business show as well. So if you've got any question, remember to join us in the community, and we'd love to have you participate in the community as well. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, live well, live with passion. Know that the best is truly, truly yet to come. And again, thank you for being on the show, Henry. Goodbye for now.
Thank you for listening to Yeukai Business Show. We will be back to bring you more episodes with success stories and advice straight from the experts. Want more? Check out www.yukaibusinessshow.com. Get your free trial of our virtual assistant service today. Just visit www.worldoutsourcingsolutions.com. Quote WOS18 or send us an email at support@worldoutsourcingsolutions.com.